Today we had 6 professors from our department who are going to join us to talk about what it means to want to pursue a career as a research engineer, as a professor, within an academic institution. So with that, I'd like to introduce our professors, who I believe most of you are pretty familiar with. Starting on the far end, we have Dr. Stephen Barrett. He graduated from Cambridge, the other Cambridge, with his PhD in 2009, and joined MIT immediately after in 2010. He has been working as the director for the Laboratory of Aviation and the Environment, and is currently, interesting to us, the chair of the AeroAstro Faculty Search Committee. So next to Dr. Barrett is Dr. Hamza Balakrishna. She earned her PhD from Stanford in 2006, and then served as a principal development engineer at NASA Ames. She then joined MIT and works within the International Center for Air Transportation and LAE as well. Dr. David Newman is next. She earned her PhD in 1992 from MIT.
You don't need to use years, do we?
And then became a professor also immediately afterward in 1993. She's been working primarily in the manned vehicle lab, but spent the last roughly 2 years as the deputy administrator for NASA. Next we have Dr. Warren Hobart. He earned his PhD from UC Berkeley in 2013. He joined MIT after a year working with Boeing and has been here since 2014. He works in the ACDL and also a member of the International Center for Air Transportation. Dr. Kahoy graduated from Stanford in 2008, and she served as a NASA postdoctoral fellow at Ames Research Center for 2008 to 2010, and then was a senior payload engineering communication scientist at the Space Systems Loral from during 2006 to 2008. Got my dates a little out of order there, but 4 years of industry and postdoc experience. She joined MIT in 2011 as a research staff and then a faculty member. And she works in the Space Systems Lab. And then finally, we have Dr. Yusuf Marzouk. Dr. Marzouk graduated with his PhD from MIT in 2004, and he worked at Sandia National Labs for 4 years before joining MIT in 2008, and works with the ACDL lab. So we have a series of questions that were submitted by our students that I'm going to start you guys out with. How the panel is going to be structured is we have 3 major areas. We have the discussion of the value of academia as a career and the enjoyment that you get from it. We have the professor selection and tenure process as our second topic. And the third one will be managing a professorship, what's actually involved in the role. I would like to acknowledge again the Graduate Student Council for supporting the recording of this event, and GA Cubed, which is the student association at AeroAstro who's running this. So our first question is going to be specifically for Dr. Newman and Dr. Barrett, and after they answer, the rest of you can jump in with your thoughts. But can you discuss what drove you to pursue an academic career? And then as you have gone through the years, are those the same factors that now sustain you in your job?
It's a great question. Everyone can hear, right? Okay. So decided to be a professor because I love to teach. So, but I came here for my graduate work, did a master's in AeroAstro as well as technology policy. And I didn't know right when I started my master's if I'd do a PhD or not. And then I really got into the research and said, okay, I think that PhD is right for me. I really wanted to teach, and then secondarily, the passion for research came. So it was kind of that. I come from a family of teachers, of elementary and high school teachers, or my folks way back when, and so I think I always put teaching and a career in teaching as and service is a really high goal. And then to be at MIT, Parker did mention, I started my faculty career and taught actually at the University of Houston. So my first faculty career was in Texas. I moved there for personal reasons and then came back. So those were the initial reasons to become a professor, kind of teaching and research, but about 50-50 I'd say in terms of my passions. And now what sustains me is 25 years here on the MIT faculty is slightly different. It's really you all. It's really the students, with undergraduates and graduate students. I love my faculty colleagues, but every day I'm actually excited to come to work because of the next generation and the next generation, and trying to think about that. And so that's all. We'll keep it quick because there's a lot of us here.
In my case, I think what drove me is the opportunity for a kind of creative outlet. So academia is a very free-form career where you can make use of any creative ideas you have and execute them. And there are very few other jobs where you can do that so easily. And that was sort of the first strand, the main one, I think, that drove me to academia. The second is I see education in general as sort of a social good that provides for social mobility and people to fulfill their potential, and wanted to be part of that as well. And I guess now the things that sustain me are the freedom to investigate things and to help invent the future. And also I like the pressure of MIT, and I'm somebody who needs pressure, so I kind of like that.
Are there any other comments from the panel on that question? Okay, so our next question is that many of you have spent time in industry before you came to MIT or during your tenure of taking gap years to work with government or industry. And I was interested if you could comment on what you see as the upsides and the downsides of pursuing an academic career versus being in industry or government. I'd like to start with Dr. Marzouk and Dr. Kahoy, who have a little more experience in this area.
Okay. So I guess as Parker mentioned, after finishing my PhD at MIT, so I'd done my undergrad, master's, and PhD straight through at MIT, and I guess I felt I needed to go somewhere else. It would sort of be a healthy thing. So I spent 4 years at Sandia Labs, and I would say Sandia kind of occupies, and most of the DOE labs occupy this middle ground. They're not quite industry. I mean, actually, the group I was in was quite a researchy group, but they're also not the same as academia. And I think over time, after spending some time at Sandia, while I really liked it and learned a lot, I did feel this pull to go back to academia. So I think that there is certainly a contrast there. But something I can say about the national labs, they are quite heterogeneous in terms of there are some groups that might be very engineering oriented, very mission oriented, very production oriented, and other groups that are function a lot more like a position there's a lot more like being a research scientist at a university, in the sense of writing proposals, deciding what kind of research you want to do, having a lot of autonomy, and that really varies from group to group. So there's no sort of blanket statement you could make about the national labs. But it was different from the university environment, and one thing that I missed the most, and I think this is something Dave alluded to, is having students. And, you know, the teaching was part of it, but for me, it was actually more the, you know, when you're working with graduate students, and especially graduate students at MIT, there's just, you know, smart, energetic, vibrant people, and exciting things start to happen. And that's something, in coming back to MIT, I realized was like really fantastic. And while at Sandia there's certainly like smart people, there wasn't this sort of constant influx of new people coming in every year, eager, new ideas, new energy. And that's something that I think, at least in my own experience, has made the university environment, that's one of the biggest differences between the university environment and a research-oriented group in a more managed environment like the National Lab. So that's one difference.
Yeah, so for me, I was working full-time as a payload engineer. I was an electrical engineer at a company that builds very large satellites. So they provide you with cable TV and other digital broadband information. And this was as I was finishing my PhD. And you know, you kind of finish requirements. I had my thesis topic pretty much under control, and was writing it up, and thought this was a good thing to try to do. It was a great experience. You really get to understand end to end the process of creating a product that, you know, works in the challenging environment of space, from getting things from just vendors and procurement and all the people involved at different levels of the company and doing that, at the other companies that are providing it, all of the documentation, all of the testing. And then bringing everything together, making sure you got what you paid for, it comes together and works as you designed it to, all of the testing, all of the verification, working with a customer, going end to end to delivery to launch to operations, understanding everything. So from that perspective, it was very educational. It helps me put in context trying to do new things in space. On the flip side, it's the space industry, although it's changing rapidly now and we're a part of that here, it's very resistant to change, and is very slow to change. So it's very, you know, kind of almost prehistoric to a lot of the technologies that we're developing here on campus in that way. And you understand why when you go through it. So that was very useful for me to see. I did miss, as has been mentioned, just being able to be a little bit more independent and creative. Generally, the companies are pretty supportive of giving you a little bit of free rein as long as you're still tied to the product advancement. If you're a smart person and you want to go do stuff on your own or lead new efforts, so they're pretty receptive of that, as long as it's still aligned with what's going on. But if you want more freedom, then it's better to be in an environment like this where you can really find sponsors and find agencies that are excited about the new capability that you're developing and see kind of like the grand long-term vision and want to support that. So that's a little bit different from that perspective. So there's that. There is, like Yusuf was saying, at the companies, at industry, and even in some of the NASA centers or FFRDC's, federally funded research and development centers, or government labs, there isn't a huge amount of turnover. There's some, but it tends to be on a 5 to 10 year basis and not a 2 to 5 year basis like it is here. So there are advantages and disadvantages of that. There's a lot of corporate memory and a lot of apprenticeship training for the new people coming in, whereas here there's a lot of loss. It's a very lossy process. A lot of great ideas, but not a lot of retainment over the years necessarily, unless there's dedicated research staff to support it. So those are things that you have to keep in mind. I think the balance is definitely there, and I'm happier working with students and innovating and having a little bit more freedom and grander visions of my own creation sometimes.
Thank you. Two of the specific downsides that students had questions about were, first, the perceived lack of influence in real engineering products that professors may have in crossing the TRL gap with their creations or their work. And then secondly is the lack of geographic choice of where you actually are able to find a position as a tenured faculty member. So could you guys comment on those specific two downsides?
I think you're up.
I'll start with the second one. I think there's a lot of choice. It's just that it may not be in the places you want them to be, right? There are schools everywhere. So I think that is a downside. I think it's a particular downside. The geographic choice is a downside when you consider, family and you're trying to relocate, or, the balance between your personal life and your professional life. It can be a downside. I will say, though, that schools are increasingly doing a lot to make that better. I think schools are, and this is true around the country, they're increasingly supportive of the fact that people like to live in places where, family members can find jobs and they help with the recruiting. But yes, and if you think about, but that's kind of true no matter, even in corporate life, right? So it's nice to say there's very little choice, but really ultimately everybody you want to do tech, you want to be in one of 3 places, right? You're looking at, or maybe 4 or 5 places if we include like the Austin area or something like that. But it's limited if you have, careers. And I don't think it's particularly a university thing. The real world thing, I think academia actually gives you a choice where you have the flexibility of either working on things which are extremely practical, and MIT does a great job of having, having things that are relevant to the real world and to real world engineering and science. But if there are academics, and it's totally fine to say I want to work on something that's fully theoretical and has no relevance to the real world, and I think academia is the only place where you'll get rewarded for doing that. You won't get rewarded for doing that in industry. And I think, if anything, academia gives you the choice of spending some part of your time in one of these worlds and some part of your time in the others, whereas if you're in industry, you don't get to choose, right? You get to do only the real world stuff.
All right, thank you.
One follow-up.
If you could use the mic, please.
That, I'm not the most qualified person to talk about this. I think Dave or Woody or Carrie are probably closer to this, but I feel like, or most everyone else on the panel, but I feel like being in academia does give you a certain kind of access to engineering companies at a higher level than you would necessarily if you're working as an engineer in a large company. You have impact on real world products, but to some extent it's a very slow process depending on where you are. And there's a big machinery that you're influencing, in some localized way. But to some extent, as an academic, you can come in and talk to people. I mean, the department has strong relationships with companies, Boeing, Airbus, things like that, at the very highest levels. And I think for people who choose to engage in that, then there's a strong path to actually making your voice heard and your influence felt.
Sure. Yeah, I guess just a couple points. So I think it's a very real issue. There's a difference between kind of the types of impacts you would have in industry versus in academia. I remember, I spent a year at Boeing, and I was working on a very small part of a very big airplane, but I was also out on the production floor watching a $100 million or $300 million airplane roll off the line, like every week.
What satellites cost.
Yeah. So that's that type of scale. It's just really hard to have in academia, and it's really fun to work on that kind of thing. At the same time, I think there is a real, like here at MIT, and some of the folks in the room actually are working on, we're building an airplane for the Air Force right now, and we're actually taking it out and flight testing it. So that's really exciting. And if you actually look at two axes, one is development time and the other is cost, we're like off the chart in terms of low cost and quick development time. So that's really cool, being able to kind of innovate so quickly on something. And that's a thing you would never see, or a thing that's really hard to replicate out in industry. So.
Excellent. Thank you all.
And also, I would push back strongly on the geographic choice issue. I think there are great schools all over the country and all over the world. And name a city, and I'll tell you some cool jobs that you could participate in that city. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I believe that's an offer for everybody in the room to email Dr. Hobart asking where they should go. Now we're going to move into phase 2 of our panel, which focuses on professor selection and then the tenure process. And the first question I have is specifically for Dr. Hobart and Dr. Balakrishna. You guys have diverse experiences with a postdoc approach to getting faculty selection and an industry approach, more or less right out of college. I wonder if you could describe the perceived advantages you saw to those approaches and how, if they were an integral part of becoming a professor.
I have a caveat, which is I actually interviewed and I deferred my start, as did Woody.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to tell you what it's like to interview as a grad student. I'm not sure that's going to help
Sure,
you.
then perhaps one of you can talk about interviewing as a grad student. Dr. Marzouk could talk about 4 years at the National Labs, if that wasn't also a deferred process. Thank you.
So, what is it like to interview as a grad student? I think if you are ready, or if there's a job opportunity that you think you're qualified for and it sounds like something you would like to do, you should try out for it. Right? I think it makes sense. I think if there are pros and cons, it depends on how far along papers are and what your CV looks like at the point at which you're interviewing. Sometimes it is helpful to make a strategic decision to say that I'm going to wait a year or two, use the time as a postdoc to do things. But my general recommendation would be that when one decides to do that, it's actually helpful to think about what you're going to achieve in that postdoc, right? So it shouldn't be that you're deciding to, it's probably not a good idea to decide to do a postdoc in order to defer a decision on whether you're going to apply for a certain kind of job or not. It's helpful to do a postdoc if the idea is that you know what you're going to achieve in that postdoc. And it might be that it's going to make you more suitable to a position in academia. Sometimes the postdoc helps you, work on a range of problems where it's going to help you get a job in industry as well. But it's helpful to use that as have goals, because it's 2 years, right? 2 years is a reasonably long time, and I think Stephen will probably talk a little more about this when he talks about the hiring process. But when you apply for a job, in terms, having done a postdoc, faculty search committees are going to look at what did you achieve in that postdoc, right? That is an important aspect as well. So it's helpful. It's useful to think of it that way, which is that a postdoc is not 2-year extension to grad school.
Excellent. Dr. Barrett, perhaps you could continue and discuss what the faculty search committee is looking for and how they value industry, academia experience, or fresh out of school graduate students.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with an observation, which is I think there's sort of two modes of people who get hired into faculty positions, at least at MIT. One mode is kind of straight out of grad school. Someone's been identified as a very successful graduate student who often they'll have some kind of finding or thing that's really special that makes them stand out. I think that's a smaller mode, and there's a few of us on the panel who went through that mode. I think the bigger mode probably is people who have been maybe a postdoc and a research scientist for perhaps 4 years, something of that order. And there's a body of work and a number of contributions, and they're really standing on their own. And I think that's kind of the second mode, which over the last few years, that's probably been a bigger mode, I think. And this is, maybe Yusuf was sort of in that mode, Kerry probably as well, I guess, as well. I'm not sure, David, which mode would you were the first mode, I think, of the kind of, yeah. So it seems like those are the two things, and that's sort of the observation. In terms of what we're looking for, we're looking for people who would be good, successful professors, and there's three elements to that, research, teaching, and service. So the smallest component probably is service, and for that you just want some indication that people are not entirely selfish, right? That they have some kind of community interest. They might be mentoring high school students or outreach activities or something like that. You want just some indication that this isn't going to be a non-collegial person who isn't going to contribute beyond their own personal interests, because I mean, this could be somebody who's a colleague for 40 years, and you want them to be good citizens for the university, to promote engineering technology more broadly, and you want some small indicators. It doesn't mean you have to spend 3 days a week working on this, but something that kind of points in that direction. And most people probably have that, I guess. It seems like most people here are very interested in promoting science and engineering to younger people, for example. And then on teaching, again, this is not sort of something that's absolutely essential, but it's very helpful that there's some indication of interest in teaching. And you don't really expect at the hiring, especially in the kind of first mode, straight out of grad school, you aren't expecting an experienced teacher or lecturer. But it's good if somebody's been a TA, or if they have some evidence of interest in teaching to show that people are committed to it. And the reason is that teaching kind of has to be good enough by the time somebody gets to tenure, and you don't necessarily expect them to be good when they start at that. It's just that you've got to have the interest and commitment to then have the possibility of reaching the trajectory to the kind of tenure bar for teaching. And then research is the big one. So that's sort of the make or break one, where teaching and service in a faculty career kind of have to be good enough. And if they're exceptional, I mean, there are people like David, who is Deputy Administrator of NASA, right? And we've had other people in the past, like Sheila Widnell, who is Secretary of the Air Force. There are people who are just off the charts in service, but we don't all have to be Deputy Administrator of NASA, but we do have to be useful citizens of our profession and of the academy. And teaching is like that too. We don't all have to be superstar teachers, but we have to at least be competent, useful teachers who are going to educate people well, and we're committed to the job. But research is where, at least I'd say it's probably true for almost all universities, they really want the most exceptional people in research they could possibly hire. And that could be high creativity or exceptional problem solving or rigor, or there are different elements to being strong at research. At MIT in particular, the thing we probably value more than anything else is impact or potential for impact. And that doesn't have to be impact on a product. It could be an impact on a policy or on the field, for example, but impact's what we value above all else, and that impact needs to be underpinned by deep scholarship that's rigorous and has a body of literature to it. So that's a lot of talking.
Perfect. Thank you for the overview of the hiring process. I think my next question.
Can I add to that? Just, I'd like to add, since I'm the only one who's been around to see all of these wonderful colleagues get hired and been on the search committee, so over the years.
David interviewing me was one of my most fun experiences in life ever, because you were just like, it was so enthusiastic, and then you took me to run into Millie. Like, I don't know if you remember this on the way. Yeah,
it was all right.
Yeah, she did a great job, so she's really good at that.
So it's so the point about, again, people could fall into different categories. I just to reiterate Stephen's point. So younger, kind of straight through. We call them, again, high risk, high payoff. That's how we think about those folks. And then other people who are 5 or 10 years out, of course, they look differently. So we don't lump everyone in the same category. We do look at people's experience and what they've accomplished. You're really just interviewing that person for itself. What I wanted to say also is that you're probably not all interested in being MIT faculty. I was so heartbroken the first time one of my students said, "I don't want your job." I was like, "You're kidding, I must not be doing it right. What do you mean they don't want?" So I've had close to 100 grad students come through, and it's what kind of faculty job you're looking for. You can, so just to open up the discussion a little bit, I've had students that are just really want to go teach, and they might go more to an undergraduate where at least 50% or more emphasis is on teaching, great places, and they're going to do some research, but they're judged differently there. To MIT, we have to realize we're on the far end of the spectrum of a research institute, and that's great, and we all love it. But if you're thinking about faculty careers, please think broadly about again that whole spectrum, to more tilted to research, somewhere that's more 50-50, or there's places that are actually more tilted to teaching with just a little bit of research. So I just wanted to mention that so you can think broadly, and again, we can tell you where former students have gone, and we have colleagues, again, in the US, and then if you want to talk international, that's a whole nother discussion, because there's actually different metrics, and it really depends on kind of what region of the world you're in if you want to think about international faculty jobs. So just to broaden the, the discussion a little bit.
One more little thing, maybe you want to go first. But it was just, remember also that in the hiring process, it's important to have advocacy from your supervisors and from people who are leaders in the field and in the community. So networking and making sure you have well-founded relationships with these people in your lives is really important, because their letters are going to be impactful and matter. So one reason to do a little time after graduate school is if you feel like you may not be in that position coming right out of graduate school. Sometimes things don't go super smoothly. Sometimes relationships aren't as imagined at the start. And so these are things you want to keep in mind and strategize a little bit about, and just be aware of that we do evaluate the person primarily and foremost, but we do take into consideration a lot of input from the community, people who've worked with you, who know of you, and people who've supervised you before.
I'll make one final point. So it might go a little outside the purpose of the panel, but so many of you, I know there's some postdocs here, but I think the vast majority of you are graduate students. It turns out when you get your PhD from MIT, you don't have to be a faculty member. So you can go do other things. And it's really easy being in the MIT environment to think that, well, everybody has an MIT PhD, but that's actually not true. And the number of PhDs in the US is actually, I mean, even though there are a lot coming out, a PhD is a very unique, that's a unique thing to get. And a PhD from one of the top schools, MIT is a top school, so a PhD from a top school, it sets you totally apart from kind of a lot of different people. In fact, I would claim it's kind of more rare than like an MD or a JD. There's just not many MIT PhDs walking around out there. So the point is, you've been in academia for a long time, but there's a lot out there. And there's a lot of really interesting, really impactful stuff out there. So we can talk about the faculty process, but I think it's also helpful to keep in mind there's just a lot of things out there that you can go off and do that are really relevant.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question is for the ladies on our board, and the question from our audience was, are there perceived gender differences in the hiring process and tenure process? And are there specific life sacrifices that you all in particular have to make to pursue this career?
One word answer, we're all like yes.
I'll start. Yes, there's perceived differences and there's real differences. We have a lot of data on this. The good news is it's changing. When I joined, it was myself and 35 men, and I love men. I keep that picture though, because it was like, what's wrong with this picture? And Sheila Widnall, she was on the faculty, but she was busy being President Clinton's Secretary of the Air Force. So that was lonely, because I like diversity and everything, but we had a real strategy, over the years. Now, the great thing is I don't know the number. I can't count. 7, 8 women faculty. So again, we're trying to diversify not just women, but underrepresented folks. We like to get diversity and inclusion. So we're just standing up a new committee for the department, actually, because it takes a lot of diligence. You have to kind of keep your eye on the ball in these things, because it takes, again, just diligence, kind of constant work. And I think if you don't have committees, or if you're not proactive in this space, then the numbers will never be what you want them to be. So for me, setting a goal and just getting it's also for me it's really important because it's excellence. What we're trying to do at MIT is be the best we can be. We're trying to be excellent, and there's again the data proves this out. The only way you can be excellent is to get a lot of diversity of intellect, of race, religion, whatever, because you want people who challenge you and don't think like you. You don't want everyone who looks like you. So that's why it's so important. We really are trying to raise the bar, and that means we need to be much more inclusive. So, it's mixed results. MIT has done exceptionally well for undergraduates, 48% or so women and men. So that's great. Big gains there. Graduate population, overall MIT, 30-ish% women. When I ran technology and policy for 10 years, I had a goal. I was personally and for the program at 40% women students. You can do it. There's great people all over. When you only admit 10% or so of your folks, you actually can admit, the kind of cohorts that you want. In AeroAstro, I'm not proud of our numbers. Again, we need to look at this. We're probably in the 20% women graduate students. We can do better. So we need, from where I sit, we should do better. And then again, to the women faculty, it's dynamic too. So you take these snapshots, but you have to look at this over the long run is what I'd say, because it's just a whole process. Getting people in the pipeline, getting people to apply, mentoring, keeping them here. Too often, I'll tell you one quick story. When I came in and thought, boy, I'm the only one in AeroAstro, a female, I looked at mechanical engineering, and they had 8 women, and I was like, wow, what a great department. I wish I could be in that department. Well, within 10 years, there was 1 female of 80 in mechanical engineering. It's different. So again, I just tell that, and then we were building up in AeroAstro. So again, it's just important, I think, because again, you kind of look at it as a dynamic process, and set goals and where do we want to be. So I'll let these guys talk.
Okay, you have something to add?
I would just echo that, there's work involved, but MIT's been really, really supportive. They are really putting the work in to support women in both AeroAstro and across the Institute. It's great to have motivated and talented colleagues to talk about these issues with when we have the time, which is the other challenge. So there is the work-life balance thing, which I'll speak on briefly. You need to figure out, it's constantly changing. How about that? There is a balance, but the target's always moving. And as I've gone through this, I feel like at different life stages I came here with a 5-month-old when I started. I have 2 kids now that are just starting the public school system. My husband's a surgeon and was a resident, and I was essentially a single parent. So there are a lot of different experiences and time commitments and trades and sacrifices that need to be made. In my case, mostly sleep. But what I will say is that if you really find that niche that works for you, where you love what you do, you come in and you want to be working on it, you want to be working with the people, you enjoy working with the students, you realize that people here are awesome, they have a sense of humor, they're goofy, they're funny, they work hard, they play hard, and it's just a great environment, everything works out. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind, that even though things are hard sometimes and maybe more challenging, depending on what lands on you as a dealing with family and gender roles versus not, there are ways to make things work out, and there's just do what makes you happy, and there are people to support you here. There have been great mentors, Maria Zuber, Deva. Having good mentors is key, and that all helps.
Were you going to say something? One thing on the hiring, what I found is that the rate at which of the women who apply to the MIT faculty search, the rate at which women get advanced to the next stage compared to men is 3 times higher. So that tells you that probably more women should be applying who aren't applying, because the people who apply, the average quality is much higher. It's just that the percentage of people who apply who are women is much lower. So for whatever reason, there's something that leads to that effect. So I'm not quite, well, we're doing our best to try and go and actively find people who should be applying who aren't, but there seems to be some kind of societal bias that exists not just in the US, and perhaps it seems to be even more pronounced when you look at international applicants. Another piece is that on the tenure track, which is about 7 years for people, at MIT at least, women who have a child are given an extra year on the tenure track, and that's some attempt by the Institute to sort of correct for the sort of observation that the biological clock and the tenure clock kind of tick at about the same rate, which is sort of bad timing in the sense that the most high pressure part of the faculty career is the first sort of 6, 7, 8 years in tenure, but there's an effort to try and alleviate that pressure.
I should add that that's actually at all schools. It's not an MIT thing. That's true at every institution
one you think
that I
of,
know.
yeah. In the US.
In the US.
Thank you all for addressing that kind of difficult question. I'm now going to open the floor for about the last 5 minutes of our panel to questions from you all. I'll bring you the mic, and then we'll have closing thoughts on the panel if you guys would like to give them. So just raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone.
Be great. Maybe you guys can introduce yourself too quickly.
Hi, I'm Hal Feng. I'm a first-year PhD in LA. I work under Stephen. So my question is, it seems to me that the life of an academic, you have to make very big commitments very early on in your career and kind of stick with them for the rest of your life. You're, from what I understand, more or less tied to one institution. Well, I think, is this a problem that you guys have sort of had to deal with? Is there like flexibility that you can find in the career later on, after you get tenure? Yeah, so maybe talk about the issue in general.
So I think you'll have to piece together our answers here. So I think people do move in between, so I don't think there's so much of a commitment. During the clock, and so most schools, both, yeah. All of those happen, right? All possibilities happen. People move a couple of years in, and usually it helps, right? So Deva said she started off in Texas before she moved here. So it's actually fairly common for people to move a couple of years or a few years.
There's a lot of opportunities to move among schools. There's a lot of opportunities to move around.
I even know of cases where people have moved to a teaching institution for a couple of years and then moved back. So you want to spend 2 years doing a lot of teaching, people do that. People move to companies and come back. So academia is fairly flexible about things like that. I think there's also, things like, typically it works out when you're tenured and because you need a little more experience and be more senior, but going to like industry leave and, to go work in a government agency, that kind of opportunity comes up pretty often. So, and this is true. I'm thinking institutions like, DARPA and NSF and places like that are very often staffed by academics who go and spend 2 years doing government service, as is NASA, right? So that kind of rotation happens fairly often.
Yeah, just the part about focusing, about choosing early and focusing, on your passion or your area. That part's absolutely true because, that's you really, especially at a place like MIT, you're going to really dive deep into the research and be known, as an expert nationally first, then internationally in that area. But within that area, it's very flexible. But again, it's not, as a faculty member, researcher, you can't do 10 things equally well. But of course, I always tell students that as well. So you really do need to focus in kind of in your area of research and passion. That is definitely a deep dive and commitment in.
Yeah, you guys covered exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I think it's extraordinarily flexible, especially, I think both pre-tenure and post-tenure, but the idea, at least at MIT, is that faculty are supposed to be at the top of their field. And I think, given that, you're very portable if you wished to move or if you wish to sort of, try something else for a while. But the initial commitment is to your research and to academic life. I think that's a commitment, but that's not sort of constrained to an institution. I think that's a life commitment.
You can sort of go do these things with little impact on your academic career.
go move. Yeah. No, I think timing is an issue. Yeah, and you can sort of take short stints within the academic framework. I think it's already well set up to take short stints, sabbaticals, leaves, things like that. If you want to make a big change, and then it will have impact on your career. But
I mean, for example, do any of you foresee leaving MIT?
Sorry?
Do we see leaving MIT?
Well, so David spent 2
Yeah.
years at NASA and came back, so. So that, I think, if
People do, right?
So I will say something that somebody, it's gonna be weird. So when I was initially thinking of coming to MIT, somebody said, yes, there's a lot of stress, with the tenure process, but the people who have the easiest time finding jobs that they like are people who decide they don't want to be here anymore. Right? So yeah, you can move, but it's this, it seems like a lack of flexibility, but if at some point you feel that you're truly unhappy and you don't want to be here, I think you've closed off very few doors, right? So I think that's a good thing. And then the one thing I wanted to say to what Yusuf said was, yes, you have a lot of flexibility. You got to be at the top of your field, but what an academic job typically gives you is you have 6 years to decide what that field is going to be. Right? You have full choice on working on anything you want, but at the end of it, they expect you to be at the, at the school at the top of that. So it's a lot of freedom, but it depends on how you look at it.
I think we're going to move on for one more question, and we're going to have a time during our luncheon for you to continue to quiz the professors on specific questions. So does anybody else have an additional question?
Hi, I'm Hugh. I'm just in the ACDL. I'm a third year graduate student. Some of you touched on this, that there's a lot of universities internationally as well. So there's academia career paths sort of over the planet. I'm wondering, how would you compare that system to the system over here in the States? Like in the States, you have the tenure system, whereas in the UK, that doesn't seem to really happen as I'm aware. Like, what are the advantages and disadvantages to whatever international institutions that you're aware of?
Shall I do that?
I can talk about internationals.
Yes, so I was a faculty member at Cambridge before I came here, very briefly for about a year and a half, and they're very different systems. You're right that there tends not to be a tenure system so much in, say, European institutions. I'm not that familiar outside of Europe, I guess, except maybe Singapore, where they do have a tenure system. So in the UK in particular, once you're sort of in the door, as it were, you have a job for life. And Cambridge, for example, does have a kind of tenure-light system, but it's very light touch, and the benefit of the doubt goes to the tenure candidate as opposed to the institution, as it would be at a US institution, which means that in a place like Cambridge, you'd have to collect, in a sense, evidence to get rid of somebody, whereas at MIT, the onus is really on you to kind of prove that you have something to offer in the very, very long term to the institution. The dynamics of the jobs are quite different too. So I think this typically a PI at a US institution would have the opportunity to build a sort of reasonable sized research group, and they might have $1 million a year of funding, and it varies by an order of magnitude either side of that. In European institutions in say the UK or France, that tends to be much lower. So you'd be working kind of much more on your own and with 1, 2, 3 students, something like that. Then maybe if you go to ETH or something, then that's more like the US system, where you'd have you'd be expected to develop a large lab and things like that. So there's a different character, and they're probably well matched to different people's styles of working and personality. I think another thing is that the US, particularly now, really emphasizes education. There's a strong focus on being committed and competent in teaching, and that focus traditionally hasn't been as high in some European institutions. I think that's probably changing now, particularly, say, in the UK with tuition fees and things, and students expect more for their £10,000 a year or whatever it is they're paying. Any other dimensions you wanted me to discuss?
You could add. Just add other differences. since I've run some MIT programs in Portugal and in Europe and things like that. It's good to look at the U.S. too as having both private institutions and public institutions. So a private institution like MIT, tenure track, and we have different percentages as well in terms of people, and that's just across the board of the top private schools. At public school, which is the vast majority of U.S. universities, then if you're in the faculty, your expectation is that you will get tenure. So it's 80, 90%. So the expectation is, again, it's much more, here's what you need to do to get tenure and things like that. So very big difference in the U.S. between private and public universities too. Just they're serving different purposes. So then if you again take a look at Europe, these are all government funded. So again, it's a very different model. It's when it's completely government funded, something I think we really got right, and now we're working with international folks around the world, is the residence base. UK, of course, has residence base. Most of Europe doesn't have that. They're starting out, but we really have a synergy between education and research. And really at MIT, but even all over the U.S., the education and research are pretty synergistic. So most international folks I work with, that's what we're trying to do. They'll say, hey, MIT, how do you do this? Because it's teaching faculties here, and this part of academia is just teaching, and then the research labs are over here. And there's really not a lot of crosstalk at all. And so again, just some other differences in terms of establishing residence-based or private or public kind of universities.
Okay, thank you for the questions.
Let me add one thing that's important if you're considering where to go is the pay is about 3 times higher here as well, so that's a useful factor. And it's serious, right? I mean, if you're in France or the UK, it actually is a bit of a struggle to live on a sort of assistant professor or lecturer salary, and that's not really an issue so much here. Places like ETH, though, do have very competitive salaries, so there are a few exceptions in Europe, and they probably would be higher than MIT and most of the US. So. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start closing up our panel. I want to give you all the opportunity to give us final words of wisdom or thoughts that you have based on the types of questions we've asked. And then we're going to move into our luncheon session where each professor will sit at one of the tables and you all can ask questions more personally with them. So that's not the end of questions by any means. So, professors.
We'll start on that. Yeah, start on your
Sure. So some closing thoughts. Actually, I'm looking at the sheet of prompts that Parker had prepared, and we didn't get to talk much about, I guess, what it's like to be a faculty member. We talked about sort of how to get there and maybe how to leave. But but assuming you like what you're doing and what's it like day to day. So I just wanted to mention a couple things on that. I think early on, so a couple of us talked about one of the nice things about being MIT is you get to work with excellent students, great people, lots of energy. Stephen said he likes the pressure. And I actually agree. I think that pressure, if I spend too much time away from campus, I miss it. But partly, I think maybe faculty at MIT tend to be, I guess insecure is maybe the wrong word, but you're always sort of, you're driven to try to do the next thing. But on a day-to-day level, what does that mean? I think one of the biggest questions that you face when you're deciding what to work on, there's things that you can do, that you could do, problems that you could tackle, and there's problems that you do actually tackle. And I think one of the questions that goes sort of at least goes through your mind is always, what's the thing that is going to have the most impact? What are going to be the high value things to do? And looking around at what's going on in your field, what needs to be done, you're sort of looking, what are the problems that really matter, rather than the problems that you could just do. Because at some point it's not about, I want to write some more papers, I want to do this and that, that's kind of boring. Like what you really want to do is solve the problems that matter. And I think that's part of the culture of the place, but I think that's something that's part of the culture of any top institution. That's something to take with you. And the other reality is that there is just never enough time. Like, like if I've taught, like this is the number one thing, throughout my day, there's just never enough time to do everything, to read everything, to talk to everyone you want to talk to spend enough time with your students, to spend enough time, writing grants and reaching out and networking. So I think a big part of life as a professor is this constant kind of optimization, culling, decision making, figuring out what are the things triage is probably, yeah. And, balancing work with family makes that even more of a stringent concern. So, I like to think that we're becoming more efficient all the time. Maybe not, but that's a big part of the day to day. But that's also part of the pressure and part of the kind of churn of the place. And I think that's, bit of what it's like.
Yeah. So, closing thoughts. Other than that, the conversations are going to continue over lunch. I think that it's better, just from my perspective, somewhere in the year out from graduate school to 5 years out from graduate school, to keep focused on whether or not you're actually considering an academic career, because your research productivity is going to matter in your applications. And it's going to matter when you get going and you get your lab rolling, if you've prepared yourself for both the research impact contribution as well as the management and direction role of things. It is very much like starting up your own small business and having your own core team. In that sense, it's not that different from a startup. The equity is terrible, but long term, I think the impact is probably a lot higher. And so that's something to keep in mind, that if you're considering it, stay visible, stay productive, stay impactful, stay connected to the community, even if you do take time out to go into industry or to explore something new. Just keep in mind that while it is possible to come back at a later time in life, and there are certainly later career hires for expertise from universities as well, it's easier if you kind of keep this on the back burner at the very least through that kind of 1 to 5 year out period of time.
Let's see. I guess I'll comment briefly on kind of, if you're considering, maybe I want to become a faculty member, what should I do? How should I make that happen? My advice is on that is don't try to become a faculty member. So you're a PhD student potentially working on a research area. Try to have impact on your research. Try to do really impactful research. Try to do things you're really interested in. Try to do something really meaningful, and it'll all work out. It's going to work out really well.
So in closing, so I'd say this is the best job in the world. I love my job. I love being a professor. No regrets. Again, it's just, I can't think of anything better. When I got the chance to be NASA Deputy Administrator, that was really awesome. Maybe the best 2 years of my life, because I learned so much. But overall, career-wise, I love being a faculty member. And then the other thing I'd add is that you're talking to a lot of tenure track faculty as well. So again, I like broadening the discussion for our tables and things like that. There's professionals, with a PhD and postdoc, research scientists. There's non-tenured track positions and things like that too. So again, there's just many more options even within academia. I don't think everyone is, maybe cut out to be a tenure track faculty. That's just who you have in front of us. But even in academia, other professional, again, research or non-tenured track positions. So we can, talk more about that. And thank you guys for your interest in being here.
So I think most of what I was going to say got covered. I was going to say a little bit similar to what Deva said, which is I think it's worth looking broadly at what you're doing and trying to decide. There's the career aspect of it, but if it's the research and there's the elements of the job, and you could be doing the things that you like in many different contexts. So I think it's worth thinking about what part of the job you really like if you're thinking about an academic career, and whether in a tenure track position is the right place to be doing it. Some of it actually, it might be worth considering jobs in industry as well, in an industrial lab, because if the best part of the job is something that you could be doing somewhere else and you would prefer that environment, then it's worth considering, right? So I think when you think about it, think about the big picture when you're trying to decide what you want to do, right? So it's easy to say, I think we're all in a place where we train people exactly the way we were trained to do exactly what we are doing, but really at some point you might be, the things about the job that you really like, you as a person individually, I think you could be getting that joy in other contexts as well. And so it's worth thinking about that when you're thinking about a career.
I guess I have a slightly different perspective to Woody, which is Woody's sort of model for being a professor, if you decide you want to do that, is to be a genius in a sense. And but that's true for Woody, of course. And, but I'd say for a lot of people, it's really, you can actually be very strategic about it, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to do that will enable you to be successful while